So at the end of the presentation, just make sure to put your headphones on the back of your chair. So this way we know which one need to be cleaned up. So thank you for that. Our first session today is with Jamie. Jamie is the VP of Customer Experience Operations at Lyft. And she's going to share with us how she thinks and work with her team to improve the customer experience at Lyft. So please join me in welcoming Jamie on stage.
So know your elephant. Today I'm going to talk to you about how I've gotten to know mine. I'm Jamie and I work at Lyft. So Lyft has been around for about 6 years. We have, to this point, served roughly 1 billion rides. And on a weekly basis, that's about 12 million, a little over 12 million rides. It's an interesting product in that we have mostly a digital interface. It's a completely digital interface within a physical reality that is about sourcing and doing the supply and demand of a critical, but kind of banal, actually, experience, which is transportation from A to B. So for us, though, what we find is with that banality, there's a lot of complexity. So you have opportunities where there's misconnections between drivers and passengers based on, I'll go back 1 second, based on time, locations, traffic. All of those things can make it so that you might have a missed ride or a missed opportunity. So how do we think about that and how do we work through it at Lyft? That's kind of what I'm going to be talking about today. And so when we think about the things that we're setting up, what a good experience looks like, it's pretty simplistic for a passenger. How do you get from A to B with a sense that it's according to the time that you want and that it's based and it has a reasonable price? Anything that you do that doesn't happen in that way makes for an equation that you could degrade trust. For drivers, the flip side of that. So if we're going to give our passengers the experience we want, we have to have enough drivers out on the road to meet their demand. And so drivers need to understand and have trust and faith in our system that their time and mileage that they put on their personal vehicle is all worth it. So it's really important to maintain that trust and earn that for our customers. 2 things have been true for me. So I've been at Lyft since July of 2015. And in that time, I was very fortunate to kind of launch the VOC program at Lyft and move that forward. We're going to talk a lot about that today. 2 things were in my favor as soon as I started. The first one was a tops-down focus on efficiency at scale. So that is around thinking through what is the contact rate? How often do customers need help? How do we give more great experiences than the few missed experiences? That's where we were focusing in the first place. The second thing was, how do we make sure that we uphold the brand that we have? We want Lyft to be known to be respectful, friendly, and caring. How do we make sure that this customer experience that we give holds up that brand and make sure that we are manifesting it as we deliver our support? And we planned a lot for this. As a company and our product team, we do a lot of work thinking about what is the golden path? What does success look like? And how do you set up and make sure that you're delivering those successful rides over and over again? We focus on that a lot. And the good news is the vast majority of our experiences are a golden path experience. It's fantastic. But there are exceptions. And that's where my team comes in. There we go. So when you have something that doesn't go right within that golden path, it's my team's mission to find it, understand it, resolve it, and then eliminate it. So that's how we think about that. So that's an end-to-end system that we're talking about. You have to understand all of the parts that are happening across the system in order to understand where in the journey did we fail and what can we do about that for the future. And so that's our elephant. That is what I consider how we think about it. So there's a parable, a Southeast Asian parable, that talks about 6 blind men encountering an elephant for the first time. So they know it's an elephant. They know it's one thing. But they each approach it from a different angle. The first man reaches out and touches the side of the elephant. And he says to himself, how smooth. The elephant must be like a wall. The second man reaches out and touches the trunk of the elephant. And he thinks to himself, how round? Is it a snake? The third man touches the tusk. And he thinks, that's really sharp. I bet the elephant's a spear. The fourth gentleman reaches out and touches the leg of the elephant. How tall? Is it a tree? The fifth gentleman reaches out, touches the ear. How wide? Is it a fan? And then finally, that sixth man goes up, and he reaches out and he touches the tail of the elephant, and he thinks to himself, how thin? Must be a rope. So they all are saying these things at the same time. They're all having these arguments. They know it's one thing. They know it's an elephant. And yet they all have such disparate opinions about what happened that they're starting to have an argument. What I felt, what I know is true, I don't understand your perception. It doesn't seem right. So how do we agree to, when all six of us have a very different opinion about what the elephant is, how do we agree to it? Their commotion, that argument that they created, woke up a wise elder. And the elder said to them, you have to remember the elephant is a big animal. All of you only touched a part when you have to put the parts together to understand the whole. That's how I think about a system. And so at Lyft, when we're thinking about building and creating a system, it all starts with that thought process of the four components of the elephant, and where we're going to spend our time today. Just a little bit more setup. Lyft, I consider that we have three different types of customers. There are passengers, there are drivers, and there are applicants, so those who are seeking to become drivers. It's a tall order to serve and make the system, the end-to-end system for all of these customers work. And because we need to think about how do we solve them delightfully and at scale. And to be completely honest with you, we haven't gotten it right many times in the past. We've made some decisions around infrastructure, tools, and channels that I would not repeat. We have made it so that our help center is a stage for almost all access to help, at least that's been the traditional way. And that can be frustrating for our passengers and our drivers. And it also takes them often out of the app into a web view, even if you seek help from the app. There's other mistakes that we've made in there. And so we knew we could do better, because what we had really created was a system where help was something more of a hunt than I wanted it. Help should never be a treasure hunt. And so that was probably the first and most important learning that we had to put together, and we had to think about how we drive. So when my team is thinking about how we create and develop this system, we do it according to the elephant and its four parts. So today I'm going to walk you through each one of these components. I'm going to talk about how we've thought about setting up our system and how I've hired and developed the team in order to build it out, as well as run it over time. So let's talk through these four components. The first one is help access. What I mean by this is just simply a customer has a question. Where do they go to find or get that answer? That's help access. That's simplistic. There are two patterns that happen with help access. The first one is you respond. A customer has a question, they want an answer, and it's almost a reaction type request. The second one is to anticipate, detect sometimes, and so you detect the problem and you solve it beforehand. I'm going to give you two examples. So when a customer raises their hand and says, oops, I'm getting a little aggressive with my pushes. When a customer raises their hand and tells us that they have a question, we need to capture all the information that we need to make sure that we can resolve for them. And then we need to make sure that we're getting them the fastest and most efficient answer. And this will take just 1 second. We'll be back to the slide. What you're going to see when the slide comes back, the screenshots are 3 help access points in the app, the driver app for Lyft. These are how the predominant way that drivers get help from Lyft. So they go to one of these 3 locations within the app. They tell us a little about the equation. We also pull in information that we know about them. And then this allows us to show, to basically be very contextual, personal, and then understand, like, what do we have to do, or what information do we need to know in order to resolve. Let me give you an example. So Agnes is a driver in San Diego. She doesn't have a personal vehicle, so she uses a program called Express Drive to rent a vehicle from us in partnership with Hertz. In San Diego, there are different rules that number of rides that you can drive that allow you to defray that rental cost on a weekly basis. And so if you drive 50 rides, you get so much amount of money, 100 rides another. Every city, every market has a slightly different number of rides for that equation, and most cities will change those numbers over time. So if Agnes has a question for us, how many rides do I need to give in order to defray 75% or 100% of my rental cost? She can go into one of these help access points, probably the first one, the driver help tab, and she can seek that answer. She'll be able to, so if you think about that approach, we'll know who she is. We'll know that she's an express drive. We know she's in San Diego. And we also know that she has a preference to get support in Spanish. All of those things allow us now to help Agnes in a way that's far more seamless than the traditional 800 numbers are email submissions or email aliases especially than what we had before. So that's an example of responding. We can also anticipate or detect problems. So this takes work over time. So you have to understand what issues you're having, and then you have to, if you can't eliminate them immediately, you can put into place a way to detect those opportunities and then proactively reach out and talk to that passenger or driver. In this particular example that I'm showing you, this is one where I want us, better yet, we can proactively solve. So let's pretend, we'll go back to Agnes. So Agnes is driving in San Diego, and her cell phone loses reception when she's going near a toll. We'll know that the route she took, because we'll know the original pickup and we'll know the drop-off, we'll know the route she took went by a toll, but we won't have seen the geofence triggered for that toll. So she won't be reimbursed for it properly. If we detect that, so she lost connectivity, but she completed the ride, and we know that completion went through a toll, we should be able to automatically detect that and then reach out to Agnes and say, hey, we noticed this happened. Don't worry, we got your back. We completed that fare, and you got the full amount, and you're reimbursed for the toll. It's a great way of not only being proactive and delightful for our customers, but it also saves time and energy on our side around what things we can do. So when I'm thinking about this part of the elephant, when I'm talking to my team and we're thinking about how do we develop and deliver help access in a way that is delightful for our customers, it's really about walking in the shoes of your customers. And so it's incredibly important to understand and ground in what your customers are trying to do and what they need. You have to understand that there's how much clarity can you drive into the interactions they're having with your app and with help. If they need help, how consistent and clear are those design patterns to enter help? And then the most important part for me is how do you balance the help access versus resolve? So giving an 800 number is a very easy way of a customer to get help, and oftentimes it's requested by customers. But it can create a situation where we're somewhat blind and we don't know enough information, or we can't pull enough information to help that customer as well as we could. And so for me, the trick for help access is really trying to bring in what you know and make it as clean as possible. So now we have a help need. So let's talk about now, how do you set up help? This part of the elephant is all about choices. It's all about the decisions you make, again, to set up that resolution that you're going to deliver for your customer. I asked 2 questions in this particular resolution path question. The first one is, do we need to have an interaction to provide help? The reason I share this is, do we need a little bit more from our customers? Do we have enough data? Can we solve without confusion? It's really important to understand that. And I'd give you two questions that I'd encourage you to think about that I learned the hard way. The first one would be, consider, do you know enough about the customer expectations? And the second one would be, is there going to be a need for customers to both get a resolve and give feedback? 2 examples I'll share. When we launched a passenger ride review bot, so that's live, it's been out for about a year, we launched that. The first iteration of that bot resolved for 7 different automations that helped passengers get help when they had a ride fare issue or a cancel fee that they didn't believe was legitimate. Those resolutions, those automations worked really well. But we had 2 situations where we thought we were a little confused with what we found. The first one was customers would get a credit for a cancel fee, and they would demand, for whatever reason, a refund. the simple ask of adding that expectation into the automation process made it the 90% of people were completely happy with the credit. And then just that small sliver of 10% allowed us to, adding that refund question in there helped us. The second one is we had a lot of customers who were very, very happy with the actual automated resolution. But then when they got to that resolution at the end, they'd be like, is that it? I really want to give you some feedback. So they're interacting with that bot, and they weren't quite satisfied with, even though they got the resolve they wanted, they weren't satisfied with the help. So in both of those cases at the very beginning of the bot launch, they would, either one of those scenarios, so I want a refund instead of a credit, or I just want to give you some feedback, would be escalated to an associate to take that answer. So we changed that in later iterations. We made it possible that we check the expectation. We could offer a refund. And we also made it possible that we could make sure that you could give us that feedback. So by doing that, we were able to satisfy the customer, collect some valuable insight into what we can do to improve our processes, and then we were also obviously able to lower the cost to serve. So a much better equation. The second one is about choices. So the second question that I would ask when I'm talking about resolution path is just, what information do you need and what choices do you want to provide for the customers? Choices can be channels. It can be the immediacy of help. It can be all kinds of different things. But for me, it's incredibly important to think about what do I absolutely positively need to understand from the customer without putting the burden on them to give you information. And that can be a tough thing to balance. So for me, again, it gets into how do you design with deep understanding and empathy. If you can understand what your customer is trying to do or what they're trying to get help with, you can make a much better service design. These are my 3 critical questions for thinking through service design. Notice you have a why, a what, and a how. The how, the third bullet of the how, masquerades a little bit as a who. I very purposely made it a how as opposed to the who, though. And it's because I want the how to kind of signal that there is a full range of ways to get answers to that customer. Go back to Agnes on the Express Drive. So that question that she had around how many rides do I need to give a week in order to get different discounts for my rental cost, that is an FAQ. If we can serve that FAQ into the app itself when Agnes goes into the help access point in Spanish, knowing the market, giving her the answer is a great way of doing it. But now let's say that it's also, she's within 30 days starting as a driver. We might at that point still offer the FAQ, but we also encourage her to have a video chat with us or a phone call, because there's a great opportunity to prevent future contacts and give her assistance as she's starting out on her journey as an express driver. Better yet, we can even set up an appointment for an associate in San Diego that's local and can talk to her about times of driving, et cetera. All of that is possible because we know what she's trying to do and then how we want to purposely give her options of what she's going to choose to get help for. So as you can imagine, when we're talking about this particular part of the elephant, this is the first time that we've seen there's some decisions and trade-offs that you can make between employee, customer, and shareholder. And so in my mind, the trick is, how do you make sure that an employee always, or an associate, always gets a contact they are skilled to solve, skilled and empowered to solve? How do we make sure customers are always resolved to their satisfaction? And then how do we make some trade-offs in the system in order to manage our volume? And that's a natural tension in this space. Let me talk to you a little about scale. So Lyft has grown a lot over the last several years. And it's been difficult to keep pace with that growth at times. And so it's really critical for us to think about scale as we're growing. And honestly, we've grown a little bit faster than our infrastructure. And so that leads us to the third section, the third component of our elephant, which is resolution steps. And so resolution steps is incredibly important. So I really love the first 2 parts of the elephant. They're the fun parts. They're design parts. It doesn't matter anything you do on the setup or the ease or however you do that and how well you design it if customers don't get an answer. So this step has to work, or else you're not going to satisfy your customers. It only counts when you get the resolve. And so let me talk to you about an operational challenge at Lyft. When I get to the slide? There we go. OK. So this is our demand. And so the blue bars are day of the week, relative contact volume across the week. You see that the blue bars are pretty flat. That is different users have different days of the week, and there's different contact types that fluxes into those blue. But you can see it's pretty standard. The gray bar, however, shows you the contacts between 12 a.m. and 5 a.m. So we have this interesting kind of dual system of where we have 100% flat volume every day of the week, and then we have a huge surge of contacts that happen on the weekend because that's when the majority of rides happen, Friday and Saturday night. And so those lost and found issues, those questions about the ride fare, those things happen when rides go up in volume. So it makes it incredibly difficult to think about skilled agents assigned to take in these contacts as needed so that we're available when customers have the question. So there's this rigor that we have to have around, I call it butts and seats. Incredibly important, but everyone has to have the skills to solve for the contacts that are coming in at that moment. So staffing to arrival times is truly important. So now let's talk about how do you do the skilling. So the skilling, again, it's great to have butts and seats. As you saw, that can be hard. And how do you make sure that you have the right folks ready to solve the right questions? We started, honestly, with a full inventory of all of our contact types. We went through and we collected every single one of the contacts, and we grouped them into about 140 submission reasons. For each one of those submission reasons, we developed a recipe. The recipe included training assumptions, data requirements, the investigation steps, and the resolution actions for all 140 of those submissions. Then we documented that workflow, and we actually incorporated it into our different tools that we have in order to show that information to associates. That is how we help our associates with training and then maintenance of that knowledge. That is how we make sure that we're always prepared and we have the right skilling in order to meet the demand and needs of our customers. When I talk about this particular step, again, if you don't answer, it doesn't count. So you have to make the entire health system work by making sure that you get this step right. It is a lot about anticipation and preparation. So how do you make sure that you know what to expect as far as volume? And how do you make sure, again, you're ready to meet that volume? What I haven't talked to you yet about at all, so beyond that scale, is I haven't talked about the velocity of change at Lyft. Literally, there are thousands of changes, thousands of releases that change our customer experiences on a weekly basis. Thousands. And so we have to work with our product team to make sure that we're as prepared as possible to answer those questions. The worst thing that could happen to an associate is hearing about a change that happened in our product from a customer who's having a problem with it. So we work really hard with our product team to make sure we have that communication. And to tell you the truth, we have something of a dismal track record. We're working through it to build up that connectivity and that communication. And we'll talk a little bit more where we get it right more. But I have to, with my team, we do a lot of work with failure modes and expect analysis, which is a simplistic way if you just think about what could possibly go wrong. If it does go wrong, how severe would it be? What's the frequency we would expect? And will we know it went wrong? Those are the questions. With that question and that training with my team, we're able to try to think through, like, OK, we can't stop all trains if we're not ready for something. But we can mitigate the worst impacts to customers or associates by thinking through which priorities and which challenges do we want to make sure we mitigate before it's launched. And the thousands of releases a week, all of that falls on this last component of the elephant. It's preparation and/or elimination of the contacts. And so that's the closed loop part and the final component of our elephant. What I shared with you before was that we had a dismal track record with releases by the product team, being prepared for those. And that's true. We're getting better, but we're dismal. What I am proud to say is we don't have a dismal track record with elimination of contacts. And so we've had, over a period of time, we've had 21x ride growth and 8x contact growth. That is based on the work of this particular component of the elephant, which is the closed loop process of how do we understand what happened, and then how do we work with our product teams to make sure that, one, there's no questions or problems with a new release, so that's prevention, or two, we make sure any one contact is the last of its kind. That's elimination. So that's the work we do with our product team to make sure that our contact rate is not growing at the same speed as our rides. This requires a ton of work, but if you can think about the trade-off and the outcome, it's incredibly worth it. So we have a goal to be trustworthy of our customers. And so that means that issues have to be rare. If and only when issues are rare, does the support team get credit for saving the day when one exception went wrong. So that's why you have to really work with the elimination side and to make sure that it is a rare thing to need help. Again, we ground a lot in the customer experience. And so how do you understand what the customer is trying to do? I like the job story concept, which is what's shown here. So when I want to, so that I can. And so that's motivation, our situations, motivation, and expected outcomes. Those, to me, help us really think through. Anytime a customer runs into an issue, we try to understand those three questions. What were they trying to do? What was the situation they were in? And what kind of outcome did they expect to have that didn't meet their expectation? When we work through those things, we find we can really dive deep and then get to the root cause, which is what we then share with our product team on how they can go help and solve. This is a really tough step, and it's a critical one to get right. It takes a ton of persistence and a lot of doggedness for the folks who work on this. They have to be able to be very savvy with data, but then they have to figure out how to tie that data with personal or empathetic stories that really drive both the heart and the mind for the product team to want to solve for that customer. You have, again, persistence, you have to be adaptable, and then you have to kind of be willing to play the long game. This is not a job for everyone. We make it a point to really be very specific on the types of behaviors and skill that you solve here, because honestly, the biggest compliment you can receive when you're on one of these teams is somebody takes your idea and calls it their own. That is the biggest compliment. And so it's a different type of mindset. So now we've talked about all four of the components of the elephant. So we're putting it now together. What I'd share, the first thing I'd share is full disclaimer, we did not think about the system as a whole as we were starting to build our tooling and our configurability. We used the hub and spoke model, so we really did focus teams or individuals on each separate component of the elephant. The reason I share that with you is because it's then very important to make sure that you have a strong center from which you can help make all the trade-off decisions, drive prioritization, so that as the work is separately moving through the elephant, it will all work together at the end. If you don't have that strong center, it won't work. As we've advanced, so about 2 to 3 years now into our journey, we're starting now to move to more of the matrix communication. So less hub and spoke, more matrix, which is now then the whole system is starting to come together, and the tail or the head can talk to the other. And so that's a challenge to try to get that connectivity and the linking at the end. It's actually a different type of thinking for your whole team. But again, when they're talking that seamlessly, it works. I hire two things first and foremost when it comes to skills and behaviors in order to help drive the furthering of service design and systems thinking. And the first behavior is critical thinking. The second one is customer obsession. Those two traits, together with functional skills and capability, make sure that we can develop anyone into a systems thinker. It allows them, and so you have to bring them into those planning, progress, and prioritization or problem meetings so that they can see how from a center, you're making those decisions, and over time, they will start to build those capabilities within the system. And the final piece that I'd share is that thinking about our system, at least, and breaking it down into those four components of our elephant, thinking through that has allowed us to think through what is our optimum design? What do we want our customer experience to be? What is that perfect future? And to be honest, there was no set of tools or systems that could actually deliver what we wanted to in our optimal design. And steps 2 and 3, so the resolution path and resolution steps, are critical to make sure that you have the right tooling, have that work. And so that's one of the biggest reasons we chose Twilio Flex at Lyft, was because of the configurability and customization. So by putting all of these four components and putting systems in place to align all four components, Twilio Flex is serving a huge part within the middle component, and we're really excited about the Lego, that's why I have Legos here, the Lego component of how we connected it and integrated into the systems end to end. So that's our journey at Lyft. It's a journey of passion and aspiration. How do we live up to our brand? Are we making sure that we're gaining and retaining the trust of our customers? That's the fun part of the journey. and I solve for it or think about it all in the terms of the elephant. What makes my elephant daunting is also what makes my job fun. So the question I have for you is, what's your elephant? So we have a time for questions. I think there's going to be some mics going around. There you go. And so if you have questions, happy to answer them.
Hey there. Thanks for the talk. Can you speak at all to kind of maybe some of the data challenges you had in terms of tying together this experience? Because obviously you have many systems involved here in detecting, say, your geofencing example.
Yeah. So the question was on, and you can correct me, the data challenge, especially from the integration into multiple systems we use. And so that has actually been one of the biggest burdens that we've really suffered, especially as we've scaled. And so when I mentioned that we didn't have a lot of maturity in our infrastructure, we had a ton of silos. And so just some very simplistic ones. If we ever got into a situation with our email queues where we had a backlog, there was no one system that we could actually see historic trends of backlogs. I couldn't at one point, I had to use 3 different sources of data to accumulate to know the number of contacts we have. We may not know, like we have scheduling, but we don't exactly know schedule adherence within the same system. So to your point, there's just tons of opportunity. And then just think about the customer from that perspective, thinking about interactions over time. Is this the second time you've contacted us within 7 days? All of those things. None of that was easy to connect or compare. So we have done a lot. I call the caveman method. So just a lot of just real hard dedication to make things work in that silo. But over time, our data science team has also done a ton of work with us to integrate tons of systems, get the real-time APIs to feed that data into our data warehouse. And so now, for the first time, we're starting to get consistent integrated data. But that has been a long journey and is critical to the success that we might have in the future.
Jamie, thanks so much. A quick question for you. You mentioned a couple metrics. Can you hear me? I'm right over here.
Now I can. Thank you.
Oh, no, I'm on the side.
I don't see where you are. Oh, there you are. Sorry. Thank you. Oh, my God.
Yeah.
What? You told me that. I forgot. Go ahead.
Sure. So you mentioned a couple different metrics that you guys look at with varying levels of complexity, lowering your cost to serve, the average contacts per day. What are some of the key measures for your team, and maybe how have those changed over the amount of time that Lyft's grown?
The first and foremost measure is customer experience. I use a proxy of contact rate for customer experience. And so the way I think about it is you have defects, things that go wrong, and then you have reported defects. And thank you. And then you have reported defects, which are contacts. And so we track that over time, and we should be, as you saw from the graph, we should be improving that over time. So that's the first and foremost thing, is everything is about, are we delivering the experience we want? And then, to your point, there are a sub-following message. So we think about, for every contact, was it resolved, and how quickly was it resolved? So there's, and that's based on, we do a survey that asks customers very specifically, did we resolve? And then we also have FCR and other measures like that. From a associate perspective, productivity and adherence to schedule is obviously incredibly important when you have that level of incoming volume coming in at those shifts. But we try not to talk about productivity with associates as much as we do on resolve. And so we want that to play out over time, but of course we track average handle time. And then we're always trying to look for what can we do to help that associate delight that customer better, faster. So we're always looking at those things. So it is very much a traditional call center type approach.
How you doing? Thank you for talking. One of the questions that comes to mind in hearing your customer experience and the journey that you've really mapped out from the beginning is how would you characterize how your KPIs really drove the change, both how you foresaw things 2 years ago and how they've really evolved today?
Let's see. So the question is, how do the KPIs kind of drive? And so again, I go back, I'm cheating a little bit, I'm going back to the last answer. So our brand is about respect, friendliness, caring. How do we make sure that our support experience lives up to that brand? And so those are the 4 components of the elephant. It really is about, easy help access, best possible, fastest, delightful resolve. It is then can we answer, and do we get to the best answer efficiently? And then finally, how do you eliminate it so it doesn't happen for other customers? So all of those things are really important. So again, the KPI, the biggest KPI is always contact rate, which is again proxy for what is the experience we're delivering. And then it's once we had the opportunity to serve you, how did we do? What was that quality? And so the forethought is really around both the getting that closed loop back, so taking contacts out of the system, as well as then just being really efficient in the operational capability. Did I answer your question? Okay.
Yeah. So thanks for the talk. That was pretty cool. As a product member, I think that we don't do very well at preparing our support and success teams for when new changes come, and I know it's really difficult for me to know what my colleagues are doing. How are you solving that problem and getting your performance from dismal to satisfactory?
Yeah, so the question is on how do we do, so we have a product gentleman, thank you for thinking through that, product gentleman in the room who wanted us to understand how are we setting up the capability of preparing for releases better than we do. And so it is really important about just connectivity. And so how do you, you're in product. There's 50,000 things you could possibly do. You have time to do 10. How do you figure that out? And so you just have so much coming at you. And so I tried to disperse. So I've created a team that connects directly with product teams. And so they can go to the sprints, they can go to design reviews, they can listen what's happening. And so since they have an understanding of what CET needs to be successful, they can, as they're working and interfacing with a product team, then they can articulate and say, oh, hey, when you're doing this, you might think about this. Because based on experience, whenever you change something and it's not transparent, I'm just now giving you an example. If you change something and it's not communicated transparently to the customer, it's going to raise a question. It's not that it's badly designed or there's even a bug in it. It's just confusing because it's not clear. And so you can kind of, as a product, call them quality leads, as a quality lead interacting with a product team, you can kind of raise those flags as you go through the process. If you're chasing, if you have, at least at Lyft, if you're chasing the teams, if you have a bureaucratic process of everyone has to submit and toll gates to go through, it just bogs the process down, and then you have people who are mutiny against that process. And so we use relationships to overcome that.
Maybe you can do one more question.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks for the talk. That was really interesting. Back to kind of the first question about data. What are some important data points that your associates need to know to help resolve a contact? Where does that data come from? And how do you make sure that they are not overwhelmed with information?
So the question was around data, and I think it's specific now to the resolution process for the associates. And so what I'd share with you is a stat. If you were in the talk yesterday, I shared the stat, but I'll give it to you anyway. So like I said in the talk, when we went through the resolution steps, we did an inventory to understand every single submission reason and what that recipe was. When we did that work, what we realized was the average ticket, has 11 data points. Each one of those data points is at least 3 clicks away, usually in different tabs of a tool that I'll share with you that's a homegrown CRM tool named Tom, or another completely separate tool altogether. So 11 data points, at least 3 clicks away, usually in multiple tools, if not tabs. So it's incredibly challenging for our associates to do in the system that we have right now. So again, when we're thinking about the resolution path and making it simplistic, that's kind of what I was talking about when you're thinking through the part of your elephant where you're trying to make sure that the associate has all the right data. So the Twilio Flex, what we're going to do is make that our abstraction layer. So we have identified the submission reasons. We know those data points. We will surface them into the Twilio Flex interface so that the associate for the specific contact has all the information they need within a couple clicks, hopefully on one screen, in order to answer those questions. So right now it's a lot of hunt and seek for our associates. They're doing a great job at it, but the whole plan with Twilio Flex is to serve them better and make it far more seamless. Yay. Well, thank you all.